coming up. Michael O'Hanlon's here, Director of Research, Foreign Policy, Brookings Institution. The UN Security Council failed to pass a resolution calling for a Gaza ceasefire. China and Russia, with veto power, shut that down. You know what, Michael? First off, welcome. Thanks for coming back on.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
And Andrea's here as well.
Hi, Andrea.
Hey, Michael.
And Scott. All right. So here's the question. In layman's terms, what is the significance of a UN resolution? Because people glaze over when they hear government resolutions.
I don't think the significance would be great in terms of Israel still wanting to continue this operation because they don't feel like they've taken out the leadership of Hamas. And that for them is sort of an irreducible minimum. They also obviously are trying to set up these security perimeters and zones for the longer term. And they may be closer to finishing that. But of course, they haven't undertaken this big operation now in the main town in the south, Rafah. And, they feel like they've got a lot of tunnels and hiding spots for Hamas leadership still to uncover. So they're going to do that anyway. The question is, can we put some pressure on them once they, let's say, take out one or two of the leaders to then call it a day and say that's good enough? Or can we put pressure on them to be a little more careful in the use of large ordnance and unguided weaponry? I think these are the practical things you could hope for if they see the world led by the United States, their traditional, top ally, putting pressure on. But they're not going to stop altogether. They consider this too much of an existential struggle.
So in the case of the UN, in my view, the UN is largely in business to send messages, and they're important messages, but messages to the world. What's the message with China and Russia blocking this?
Well, China and Russia, I'm not surprised that Russia would block it. We're pretty much in an all-out adversarial relationship with them right now. Although, of course, we did try to warn them about the big ISIS attack over the weekend in Moscow, and that was a good thing for us to have done. And you would hope it would at least be met with some degree of appreciation. But in general, Russia is just obviously of the view that we are trying to do everything in our power to punish them, to hurt them, to stop them on the battlefield, to make their economy suffer, and they're going to return the favor. That's just the way Putin is. With China, it's a little bit more of a calculation, and there are certainly issues still where China is working with us and cooperating. And by the way, China is not selling or giving weapons to Russia, even though they're buying plenty of Russian oil and gas. And so in that sense, I think China probably just decided in this particular case to give Russia their tactical support, knowing the resolution's not going to mean that much anyway.
French news media reporting overnight that now China says it would consider supporting the UN Security Council draft resolution, Michael. So, A, does that matter at this point? And B, will it matter kind of as a whole? Because Netanyahu has already said he's going to do what he's going to do.
Yeah, Andrea, I don't think it matters that much. Although, again, it fits into what I just said. I think that China's not adamantly against the resolution, and China's not adamantly against the United States. China's calculations are more, specific to the actual issue, and they can change based on circumstances. So, yeah, I wouldn't rule that altogether. But I would say that even if China does support this, and even if Russia supports it, it's just not going to do that much because nobody is threatening to put military forces into Israel or Gaza to somehow separate the belligerents or protect the Palestinians or whatever fanciful scenario we want to imagine. And so this resolution is going to be, as you say a minute ago, Steve, symbolic more than anything.
Russia claims a major missile strike on Ukraine over the weekend, and at least one of the missiles they sent supposedly was into Polish airspace. Accident, intentional, or somewhere in between? Who knows?
Yeah, Putin has an interest in making us worry that this war could escalate, but he also has an interest in not actually letting the war escalate.
Right.
Because the last thing he wants to do is fight NATO. And so, there have been these kind of incidents previously, and they're not very common. They don't happen very often, and they don't actually tend to be very lethal. They tend to be, as you say, sort of potentially, plausibly, deniably accidental. But I wouldn't put it past Putin to just probe and see what kind of a reaction he gets. Whenever he gets the Western world nervous, he likes to hope that increases the chances that we'll reduce our aid to Ukraine or try to, look for some kind of a compromised diplomatic solution, which would presumably entail Russia keeping some of the land it has now. That's got to be his hope. And he feels that if he can either cajole the West or scare the West or just outlast the Western world, then that's the best way for him to achieve that goal. I don't think he's going to attack Poland, but he may want to make us a little nervous that he could.
Well, and as soon as he does, of course, then it is a NATO issue.
Right.
And, well,
right.
None of us want that. Andre?
No, I was going to follow up with the Polish question too. So it doesn't seem that that's a huge concern at this point. They're going to set their vote. They're set to vote on the resolution again today at some point.
Yeah, everything's a concern. And there have certainly been times, especially in the fall of 2022, when Russian forces were retreating and, doing very badly on the battlefield, and Ukraine was on the march. Back then, we had a lot of worries about what Putin might do next, because ironically, but probably correctly, we assessed that he would be at his most dangerous when he was also doing his worst on the battlefield. That would be the moment when he might want to consider escalation, either to attack NATO territory somehow, or to attack, weapons coming in from NATO territory, or even to make the kinds of nuclear weapons threats that he did make, whether at the expense of Ukraine or even at the expense of NATO. And so that was the scariest moment, or the period of time that people were most concerned about this sort of thing getting out of hand. But it could always come back. And if Putin ever decides that he could benefit tactically from creating a moment of fear, then I think I would not put it past him. I don't know that he's going to see a lot of opportunity right now. I think he'd probably rather keep the U.S. aid package in Congress sort of in this state of, paralysis, which means he probably should just keep fighting the same way he's fighting for the moment. That's probably his smarter strategy. But who knows what's going on in that guy's head.
We'll let you go on this. Congress could barely get another spending bill done this weekend, so asking him to do something really difficult is probably expecting way too much of our elected officials. However, as Ukraine toils on the battlefield, you know more than anybody about this. How bad is it? I mean, every headline blares Ukraine's on their last leg here when it comes to weapons and ammunition and the ability to fight for themselves. Do we know how bad it is?
Well, Steve, it's a great question. And I think the answer is no, because I don't think military analysis is that scientific of a discipline. You put a lot of technical expertise into it. And then ultimately you have to factor in human morale. And, Ukraine has a lot less artillery, a lot less ammunition than they would like, but they can also conserve their rounds and use the weaponry they have more selectively, more carefully, not do as many barrage attacks, and still probably hold their own for a while. So I think it has to be put in terms of probability. I think there is, like Hemingway said about bankruptcy, sometimes it happens gradually and then suddenly. And that's unfortunately the dilemma here, because we don't have enough predictive tools to be as precise as, let's say, the weathermen are with the weather going out 2 weeks. It's more like predicting the weather going out 2 months, where you got a couple of things you can latch onto, but you really don't know.
Right.
My guess is there's some chance Ukraine could hold on indefinitely with the weaponry Europe is providing, because Europe provides almost half of Ukraine's overall weaponry so far in this war. But there's also a chance we could see collapse begin sometime in the course of the warm weather in this year.
Fighting season is on. Michael O'Hanlon, Director of Research, Foreign Policy, Brookings Institute. Enjoy your day. Odd thing to say after this conversation, but I hope you do.
Thank you. Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Michael.
Take care.